Late one October night, in a small town veiled in mist, there was a dense forest called Shadow Grove. Locals avoided it, especially after dark. They said the air there was too still, and the trees grew too close, like they were listening, waiting. The stories had always intrigued Sarah, a skeptic who enjoyed debunking ghost tales. She'd heard the rumors that if you walked into Shadow Grove at midnight, you might see a figure at the heart of the woods, silent and still, watching you from the shadows. No one could describe its face, just that its gaze was unnaturally intense, paralyzing anyone who met it. Determined to prove there was nothing supernatural about the forest, Sarah grabbed a flashlight and her phone and set out alone. She'd scoffed at the stories and teased her friends who had warned her. "It's just a bunch of old trees," she had said. But as she entered the grove, the air grew thick and damp, muffling all sounds, even her own footsteps. Her flashlight struggled to pierce the dense darkness, flickering weakly. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist, creating shapes that vanished the moment she tried to focus on them. As she walked deeper, she realized the forest was utterly silent. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, just a heavy, oppressive silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, but pride kept her going. After a while, she noticed something strange. The path behind her seemed to have disappeared, swallowed by the shadows. She spun around, disoriented. Her flashlight flickered again, and when it came back on, she saw something at the edge of her light, a figure, standing completely still. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch too long, too crooked. Its head was tilted to one side, as if curious, but its face was featureless, an inky void that somehow stared back at her. Frozen, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She tried to move, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground, as if the forest itself held her in place. The figure tilted its head further, and she felt a pressure in her mind, an ancient, cold presence pressing into her thoughts. Then, she heard it, a faint whisper, echoing in her mind. "Lost, lost, alone." The voice was hollow, rasping, as if it hadn't been used in centuries. It filled her head, growing louder, until she felt like her skull would split. Just as she was on the verge of screaming, her flashlight went out completely, plunging her into absolute darkness. She fumbled for her phone, but it was dead, the screen lifeless. In the silence, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving closer. No one ever saw Sarah again, but sometimes, on quiet nights, locals walking near Shadow Grove say they hear faint footsteps behind them, and when they turn, they see a dark figure watching from the trees, head tilted, silent and waiting, just as it had done for Sarah.